Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptic Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Cryptic Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for our Comics Creator Chat. I'm excited because I have none other than comics legend Joe Casey in the house, hanging out with me to talk about his new series dropping soon for Marvel Comics, Weapon X-Men, where he's putting the new sauce slogan into selling Logan and channeling the wise ass into Wade. Joe, it's been a minute since we talked last. How you doing?
Good, man. How are you, Byron?
I'm doing all right. I'm hanging in there. Hopefully that got everybody excited about this book. I'm excited about this book. I got a chance to check out the little sneak peek you sent over. I'd love it. I think it's great. I've been catching up on your Substack. Oh yeah, which I encourage everyone to check the Substack out and sub up. If nothing else, to see your suspect drawing skills. I'll put a link in the show notes. But you're back now to writing for the big two and doing a bit of reflection on your days with the X Office, writing various X-Men properties that you've cleverly titled Recollections with the X. So has that been a cathartic process for you to kind of dive back into those days?
Well, I don't know about cathartic. It's been interesting, and it's been,
Okay.
20 plus years. So there's definitely some perspective that I didn't have before. And that's been interesting
Sure.
to kind of explore and put out there. And like you say, I'm along with my insights, putting out a lot of behind the scenes stuff that no one's ever seen and no one ever probably wanted to see, but it's there. Character sketches and layout sketches and different things that I'm a process junkie, and I love seeing other people's process. I'm not quite so thrilled with my own, which is probably why it took me a long time to kind of put this stuff out in the world. But I manned up late last year and started it up, and it's been fun. It's been fun, and I think that the people that see it seem to dig it, and it's free. So I promise you get your money's worth.
You know, I'm enjoying the sausage making process that you're sharing. I think it's a lot of fun. I mean, those Claremont days, especially, leading into sort of the new wave of all the things that happened with the X books back when you were writing it is so formative for me. So it's just really cool to see some of how that was synthesized and generated from your head, and kind of gets me reliving some of those days myself. So I think it's great. But it's got me also thinking about career evolutions for creators who work on these massive superhero properties. You spend a lot of time heavily invested in getting to know these iconic characters in an intimate way. But unless you're Chris Claremont, it feels normal to kind of pursue other projects for a while, which you've done, creator-owned stuff or TV writing, till you're inevitably sort of drawn back into their orbit. So 2024 was a bit of a comics renaissance for you. So what's it like seeing those DC and Marvel universes with a fresh set of eyes now? Are you excited?
I'm excited. I come into it with more open-eyed than I was when I was a kid and breaking in. I kind of know what's at the party. I know what food they serve and what drinks they serve. So there's no more surprises. It's just as invigorating and infuriating as it ever was. But I've got the perspective of decades doing it, so it's different in that respect. The other thing about it is you realize that if you came up in this business writing for Marvel and DC, and then before that being a fan of those characters and those universes, it's really in your DNA. It's a little like coming home to maybe a dysfunctional family, but coming home nonetheless. And it's something I know how to do. I know how to write for these universes. I know how to write these kinds of superhero comics, and to not do it when I have the opportunity to do it seems like a waste. And I love doing it. I love writing for these universes. So, it's certainly not for the money that I do these gigs, but it's definitely for the love of the game,
Yeah. Yeah, I recently actually read Chris Claremont's Madripoor Nights, where he's going back and revisiting Logan's time there. And for me, didn't hit. And before anybody, jumps on me for it's not bad. It wasn't bad at all, And I hate fandom ripping into things that they say they love, but sometimes things just aren't for you. And that was the case. It's a beautiful book. Edgar Salazar did a great job visually with it. I just felt like it was a song I'd heard before. And when I crack open a book these days, I want the excitement of hearing the song for the first time, and falling in love with it. Even if you're familiar with the band, you want the new album. So Weapon X hit all those right notes for me, but returning home can be scary sometimes, can't can it not?
It is. I mean, the most for Weapon X-Men, the most formidable challenge, I guess, was if I could write Cable again in a way that
Okay.
felt like it was me writing the character. Because that was Cable was my first monthly gig at Marvel Comics when I first got into the business, and working with artist Jose Ladrone, visionary artist, even back then, and being a new guy on the block, I put everything I had to. So did Ladrone. We both put everything that we had into that comic, every ounce of enthusiasm and craft and skill that we had at that point, and really invested in that character for that period of time that I was writing him. To come back to a character like that after 25 years is very strange. Wolverine's a different story. Wolverine kind of has a voice that everybody's sort of keyed into from reading him growing up, and I've written him before in the past, here and there. But Cable was a very personal book for me at the time because it was all I had. So to come back to write that character again has been it's been interesting. And the thing about a team book is that you're looking to find the chemistry between the
Sure.
characters. And the one thing that I can say that I'm pretty confident about, and it's starting from issue 1, is that chemistry of the characters is kind of there, even as unlikely as the team is with the Chamber and Thunderbird and stuff like that. They kind of gelled for me as a writer. They gelled fairly quickly, and how they related to each other, how they interacted, and to me, that's the essence of any good team book, is how do those team members interact. So hopefully, hopefully it's as good as I think it is, and that people will grok to it like I have.
I really dug it. I mean, this is typical Joe Casey style. It's just very much let's fucking go, with arguably two of the biggest characters in the Marvel universe at this moment in time. You have, well, at least as far as, modern pop culture goes as a
Yeah,
whole, with
sure.
Deadpool and Wolverine, which are the headliners for Weapon X-Men. Wolverine debuted in 74 and Deadpool was 1990. So they've been around for some time. And it just gets me thinking about these generational perceptions. My son has a very different filter than I do. For him, Logan is Hugh Jackman and Wade is Ryan Reynolds.
Right.
So are they sort of, I guess the question is, are they one note, right? Like you can do so many things with Batman and people continue to do that, which is really amazing. But when characters have so much identity and mythos, do they have to operate within certain boundaries as characters? You talked about writing Cable. Cable, there's Josh Brolin, but it's just not the same loaded amount of information, right? He just
Yeah.
doesn't have as much technology to him. So how did you approach making Logan and Wade feel fresh?
Well, with Wolverine, I think he's one of those characters that sort of deepens and ripens with age. His history informs him. He went so long with being the mysterious "where did he come from" character, and then back when I was writing Uncanny X-Men, they kind of turned that around, gave him an origin, and kind of filled in some backstory, and started to kind of go deeper in who he was. So now we're 50 years on with that character, and I look at his history as in the same way that like you said, Batman deepens as a character the more he goes on, because he 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 adapts to the times, he reflects the times in various eras, and I think Wolverine, to a lesser extent, can do that. Um, he's kind of the seen it all guy, and that's a valuable character to have in the dynamic of a team book. Now, Deadpool is a whole different story. I've never written Deadpool before, And I looked at Deadpool as the meta character. It's he almost knows he's in a comic book. He almost knows what the what's going on the fourth wall, you know. And he's almost like a reader's point of view. There's a bit which is not, I mean, it's not a spoiler, but there's a bit in Weapon X-Men 1 where he, comments on the name of the team and how no one ever thought of this before. And he kind of lists people who maybe should have but didn't. That kind of stuff is a lot of fun. That's been, to me, the revelation of writing that character, is that it's not my voice, but I get to put a certain fan perspective. I can push it through the Deadpool filter and say things about the scenario and about the comic itself and about, the Marvel universe and Marvel as a brand. I get to comment on all of that stuff and get away with it. So that's been a ton of fun, which I didn't expect.
Free pass.
I knew Deadpool was kind of a fourth wall breaker, but once I got in and started putting words in his mouth, I realized that I had a lot to say through him. And he's kind of served that function. So that's been really cool.
So you can vent out a Marvel career in one character. There you go.
That's right. I've had to be clever about it with other books in the past, but now I can just lay it all out there through him.
Well, I want to congratulate you first on the Weapon X title. Yeah, it's an epiphany someone should have had a long time ago. Having read issue 1, you certainly patted yourself on the back. I'll leave it there with the title, but you should be proud. And I'm flabbergasted nobody's thought of this. It's before, and you spelled out sort of the evolution on Substack. But for those who haven't read about it yet, could you kind of walk us through the genesis of how this came about?
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest, when I was talking to the previous X-Men editor about doing some work there, I tried to think of the most commercial idea that I could. I mean, what I've done in the past when I've done really high profile IPs like Superman and even the X-Men 20 years ago. And I tend to come at it, I always have the best intentions, but something in me tends to subvert the characters in some way, subvert the concept in some way, which is interesting as a writer and so hopefully interesting for a reader. It's not the most commercial approach, because it's, when you take big swings like that with characters that people really have embraced over time and really love, you take a chance of alienating people. And I certainly did on both of those IPs in my time writing them. But so here I was saying, if I am going to come back to Marvel in any capacity, I'm going to really swing for the fences commercially. So the fact that no one had ever come up with that title before, no one ever used that title or thought of it, I had no choice. I thought, man, if I don't do this now, somebody's going to come along and do it before me. And as it turns out, there was a little bit of behind the scenes nonsense where it kind of seemed that way. But I have to tell you, hand to God, I was there first. And I was the one who came up with that title and brought it to Marvel. And, whatever happened after that was, aggravating at the time, but, we're here now. And I think the book is always what it was meant to be, which was big commercial swing, big blockbuster comic. And, hopefully people will get into it on that basis.
Well, you talked about the team members, Wolverine, Deadpool, Cable, Chamber, and Thunderbird. And you had a theory on Substack about the perfect X-Men team, formula being 5. I think Avengers was maybe 7. But elaborate on that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the best, most memorable runs on the X-Men have been 5-member teams. I mean, there's the original X-Men, of course. There's
Sure.
the classic Claremont Byrne era, even though there was other characters and other members. Once it got really cooking, the Dark Phoenix saga was basically Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Colossus, Storm. That was the 5. that was the heyday of that title, or that run. Grant Morrison, when he came on, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Emma Frost, and Wolverine, right? Yeah, five members. And it worked right off the bat. So it's, I mean, look, it's a half-baked theory, but the evidence backs it up on some level. Because when the X-Men in particular have had this sort of sprawling roster, it's it's fun on one level because there's a lot of characters to touch upon. But on the other hand, it's very scattered narratively, and it becomes more of a soap opera than an ensemble book. Um, and writers like to impose these kind of weird rules on themselves because it helps us sleep at night when we're obsessing about things that are completely meaningless, like roster numbers and things like that. But um, like I said, I had the evidence to back it up, so I felt pretty good putting that out there, and I stand by it, and I stand by the Avengers being 7 members. Um, it's just it just seems like the way it goes. Defenders 4, so it should be 4 Defenders. Um, Justice League is kind of sort of between 7 to 10. Kind of the sweet spot for Justice League. So I mean, you can apply this wacky theory to anything and come up with some answer that feels right and has evidence to back it up. So that's kind of where that came from.
Well, you articulated it well, I think, and that maybe I had the light bulb moment there of why Krakoa and that whole arc didn't connect with me in the same way. Being a Claremont kid, and I guess used to that nucleus of 5,
Yeah.
and Krakoa just seems so sprawling that I don't know. I just never could quite connect with it in the same way.
I think fans, I mean, readers are generally older now, but I think especially when we were kids, you wanted the security of knowing who your quote unquote family was. You didn't want this kind of open-ended, amorphous blob of a cast. You wanted a tight-knit group of found family. That's I think that's what readers of our generation probably responded to. And it just makes sense to me on some level.
Yeah. So for different generations, like thinking about my son and his introduction to Marvel, and I was a Marvel kid. It's funny because my co-host Jimmy is very much a DC kid, and it just seems to be about whatever you were exposed to in that sweet spot when you were
Yeah.
a kid, one or the other, and that's the one that stuck.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm a Marvel kid, and so him watching the movies, and seeing him excited about it. Have the movies done a disservice to that generation, or is that the only end we've got on bringing different and a younger generation into reading the big two? And then, just like we all did, you get into those, and then at that time, then you start reading Hellblazer and Sandman or The Demon, and broadening the scope of what you're interested in comics.
Well, that's the hope. I mean, it's funny. I think that when I was a kid and just really started to glom onto comics as my thing, I was a Marvel kid too, and my book was The Avengers. That was my book. That was the book I loved, and it was prime time for that book. It was that Jim Shooter, David Michelinie, George Perez, John Byrne runs that were just fantastic. Now, back then, you'd dream about why maybe one day there'd be an Avengers movie, but in a way, you thought that's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Even when you got a little older and started maybe be a little savvy about how movies are made and how these things work, and then you even get more cynical about it because you know more about what a long shot it is. That's never going to. Well, it happened, and not only did it happen in the biggest way possible. The Avengers, highest grossing movie ever, Avengers Endgame anyway. The other side of that coin is that in pop culture, things that have this sort of rise, they go from, in this case, comic books to toys to maybe a cartoon to maybe a TV show and then maybe to movies and then blockbuster movies and then top of the box office movies. There's really nowhere to go after that. Everything becomes, unfortunately, a diminishing return. There's always a peak for something in pop culture. And it's interesting. I've sort of reconciled my own career in such a way that I've been what I consider a cult writer for 25 years. I've stayed sort of just below the harsh spotlight of, kind of big time A-list writers and creators and kind of been quietly doing my thing. And I've tried to, in a way, sort of avoid that peak. I never wanted to be number one because no one's number one forever. And the drop off seems very precipitous. So
Yep.
with these things like the Avengers, it's very, it's a bit sobering to think that Avengers Endgame 2019 might have been the peak of something that I loved as a kid and had, dreamed about that kind of thing. And it happened. Now they're going to take a big swing with, Doomsday and Secret Wars and all that stuff. And I'm sure people will come out for them, but it's hard to imagine that they'll top Endgame. And that's true for a lot of pop culture IP. It rises through the ranks of awareness, it peaks, and then it's gone. Sometimes just for a while, then comes back. But I wish that the movies filtered more of a wider audience back to the comic book stores, back to the source material. But it hasn't really seemed to happen. Mainly because, and this is a wild theory that I haven't put on Substack, is that with the way that comics are distributed, with the direct market the way it is, and the way it's become in the last, 10 years, and the way the comic book media sphere has shrunken and splintered and become very fractured, it's not a system that's set up to welcome walk-ins and curiosity from movies and stuff. It's just, some stores do it well. My local store here does it really well. At their front counter, there's, shelves of trade paperbacks that relate to the things that are sort of out at the moment, whether it's Disney Plus shows or Marvel movies in the theater or DC movies in the theater. So they do a good job, but you got to get in those stores first. You have to know where they are and walk into them. And we just, the awareness factor is a problem. It's not like it was even 20 years ago when there were a few comic book websites that everybody went to. There was Wizard Magazine that everybody at least was aware of if they didn't read it religiously. Wizard Magazine at one point sold more copies than any single comic book that was being put out. So there was a center to our universe that we don't have anymore. And I think that the market suffers for it, So, it's not doom and gloom, but it's definitely something that needs to be contended with,
Yeah, it just makes me wonder how we can recreate such a thing. I'm in the comics journalism sphere. I'm now the editor-in-chief of Comic Book Yeti, so it's something that I think about a lot, how to engage those people who are on the periphery, on the outside. So my son played Fortnite a lot for a while, and you would have all these skins. You'd have a Deadpool skin or something like that. And it seems like a very easy and natural transition to then say, well, you really like this characters. You've seen the movie. You'll buy the skin. So why won't you read the book? And I can't figure it out.
It's a tough hill to climb. I feel like comic books as a medium are something that you get or you don't get. I'm sure adults that are perfectly literate and perfectly intelligent. You give them a comic book and they still don't know how to read it. They don't know where to look at first and what comes first. Do I look at the art? Do I look at the writing? What order do I look? It's to them, it's a math problem that they can't solve, which, for me, having connected with them at an early age, it's like a second language to me. But I know not everybody feels that way. So it's not. We have to be honest with ourselves that sometimes it's not the most accessible medium. I mean, to take it back to Weapon X-Men is meant to be a very accessible book. If you saw, Wolverine, Deadpool, if you saw Deadpool 2 with Cable in it, you could kind of pick up this book and there's not a lot to catch up on. The characters are right there. Their interactions are recognizable. I don't bring in a lot of, I know that Wolverine and Deadpool and Cable, they all have like siblings and children and, different iterations of them running around in different multiverses. Forget all that. This is just the basic characters in their prime essence. So, it's meant to be accessible. And hopefully that makes a difference. But, and again, in this market, who knows? Who knows? My fingers are crossed, though.
Well, that makes a good lead in, I think, for Thunderbird, and which is why I was curious about that. Thanks for the inclusion of a native representation lens here. It's something near and dear to my own heart. And you went through several iterations who it could have been: Sabretooth, Quicksilver, Namor, to name a few. So what was compelling about John?
Well, I didn't know he had been resurrected. That was the thing. I was talking to
Okay.
a friend of mine, Steve Orlando, another comic book writer who I've known since he was a fetus.
Yeah.
And he had written this one shot that had brought Thunderbird back. And he told me, hey, what about Thunderbird? He's back and no one's doing anything with him as far as he knew. And I was like, really? Because I always had that fascination with Thunderbird. I thought the original Cockrum costume was awesome, even though they just changed the costume. But the story demanded, and people will see as the story plays out, the first story, there's a reason he's back in his original costume. One is that it's a story-driven reason. Two, I just dig that Cockrum design, man. I love it so much. But the interesting about Thunderbird is that he has no history to contend with, really. He appeared in 2 issues of X-Men and then was gone for, 50 years of publishing history, basically. And however many years you want to count that Marvel time, where he missed everything that was significant about X-Men narrative, from the Dark Phoenix saga to Days of Future Past to Age of Apocalypse to Grant's run he missed all of it. So he's a blank slate. I had to reread 3 comics to kind of catch up on who he was and what he was about. And he didn't get along with Wolverine back then. So to put him on a team with a Wolverine that has had that much time and experienced all those stories and experienced all those events, where Thunderbird is playing catch up, it was so rich with story potential that it kind of dominates the first 5 issues of Thunderbird's arc of reconciling the fact that he's missed so much. It starts off as sort of the undercurrent, but then as we get into the first 5, it really blows up into the main thing to contend with. And so I feel very lucky that a character like that was available that hadn't been, to be perfectly frank, worn out by, 50 years of stories, and yet he's so primal and so intrinsic to the original, all new, all different X-Men, that it was just, I just felt great about getting him in there. I owe Steve Orlando, big props for suggesting him.
Yeah, he really, down to the costume, is so iconic. There's few people that won't recognize him busting out of his, first appearance there, and it is one of those things that's instantly memorable. And I think that is what I love about this book so much, is you're able to make an immediate emotional connection, and that dialogue is created, and you're engaging with the characters, and you're working with artist ChrisCross on the project.
Yep.
And this look has a modern anime aesthetic with lots of like establishing headshots. Counterpoint is this rapidly reintroduction of characters where you have kinetic movement sequences with these distinctly manga reminiscent motion blur
Yeah.
repetitions. So it simultaneously pays due to the past with these characters, but brings it very much front and center to what kids are reading now, and because that's what I hear with younger readers. It's like, are you reading comics? Well, I'm reading manga, so that something that bridges those two worlds is a really smart play. And I think Chris just killed it with this.
Yeah. He's great. He's great. And he definitely brings, he's kind of that one, he's my age, and he predates me by a few years in the business, but we have the same influences, the same grounding in when we came up in comics and what we were reading when we were kids. That was really important. But in addition to that, Cross really, like you say, brings a modern sensibility to what he does that hopefully, to your point, bridges that gap to some extent. I sort of bring the iconography, and Cross brings the kineticism, and the stuff that
Okay.
is kind of, manga aesthetic, which I think is cool, I'm glad it worked for you.
Yeah, I spent time with lots of TV and movie production as a grip and a cameraman. So I notice camera angles probably more than your average comics reader does.
Sure.
And is that tight perspective that it's got kind of a lower vantage point that's looking up at something? Is that something that Chris brought to the table, or is that part of your script? Because it's very, very cinematic.
I think it's a mix. I mean, Chris and I have worked together before on other projects, so we kind of know where the other's at in terms of sensibility. But so there are times where I will, suggest an angle that I think will work best, and there's sometimes where I don't, and he comes up with something great. I mean, that's the kind of the magic of collaboration. It's why I love making comics. Is it's really in the sense of a writer and an artist. It's the sum greater than its parts. And I think that's the case here. And and each issue gets better and better. And I can't wait for people to check it out.
Yeah, there's one really nice moment between Cable and Chamber that's a I'll put it as a reflective moment, and I'll leave it there. I can't wait for people to see that in the book because that looks so good. It's
Yeah.
great.
The thing about Chamber is I wanted this to be a book of iconic characters. Like you said about Thunderbird, he's iconic for a weird, strange reason. Like he was featured on one of those covers of X-Men that he appeared in as a main sort of character, it seemed like. And that imagery stuck in people's head. Chamber to me is sort of an icon of the 90s X-Men. He's the most um, you know, put upon mutant in that his powers really, he can't hide who he is. He can't hide what he is.
Right.
And in the 90s, that was a kind of a cool thing. That was just coming into its own of like, we're out and we're proud. So I've
Yeah.
always loved that character. I've always loved the visual. And that's why I put him in Uncanny X-Men, because I just gravitated to his look and his dilemma and his character. So he might to some people seem like a left field choice, but he really works within the team dynamic, I think.
Well, I think he's perfect for this age too. The one we're actually living in, and the one the Marvel universe is living in, where Orcus is hunting all the mutants, and you can't hide who you are. And
Right.
that I don't know if anything is more topical right now than that. So
Unfortunately, that's right. Yeah.
yeah. Well, we all know from solicits for issue 2 that Baron Strucker will play a significant antagonist role early on. Logan has an established history with him, but like who doesn't Logan have an established history with? So it sounds like you had a fair bit of creative freedom with it. Nazis seem to be making a strong resurgence in Marvel right now as villains. But they do. Like I read Jed McKay's Avengers Blood Hunt, and that was Cap punching Nazi vampires.
Yeah.
So, you know, Strucker is classically more of an enemy for Cap or Nick Fury. So what was appealing about him, because he really is in many ways a bygone era, not unlike Thunderbird. I guess it gives you a lot of range to develop.
Well, it's funny. Again, this is the crass way of putting it. I wanted to put as many movie stars in this book as I could. And Baron Strucker was in Avengers Age of Ultron, and he had that history with Wolverine, even if I think the one that people most remember is that classic Jim Lee drawn issue with the flashback to World War II with Captain America and Logan. We touch on that in issue 2. That's where Baron Strucker knows him from, is that encounter, at least where he first met him. With this story, I don't lean too much into the Nazi thing. I mean, at Marvel, luckily, you have Hydra, or you had Hydra, which is this, nowadays the Nazi stand-in. But I see Baron Strucker even apart from that. He's more of a opportunist, would-be conqueror. He'll align with anybody that will help further his end. And in this case, what he needs to further his end is Wolverine. It's in the solicitations. He comes up with, he's going to create a new army of not LMDs, but WMDs. They're called Wolverines of Mass Destruction, or at least that's the joke in the. But he finds a way to utilize Wolverine's adamantium skeleton, how that's built, and his berserker rage, which is kind of a powerful tool if you can harness it right. And so that's part of his scheme, which leads to in issue 3, we're going to evolve Baron Strucker into the next level of supervillain. So he's kind of a little old in the tooth. He's been around for a while. So I think he's due for a physical upgrade. So we came up with something that I'm really pretty psyched about. It's another kind of obvious name that we've given him that, again, no one thought of before. So I feel like I'm on a roll with these things. So I just went with it. So issue 3 is the sort of reveal of that new version of Baron Strucker, and as a new character.
Hold up.
Well, last time you were on the press tour trail promoting the first issue of Johnny Quest When We Talk with Dynamite, and now there's a forthcoming Space Ghost and Johnny Quest crossover event you're writing. We know the Quest crew is being brought in to investigate a mysterious spacecraft that found by the government is in Area 51, which is kind of a bridge for our galactic crime-fighting friend to join the party. So you're working with fellow Johnny Quest co-creator Sebastian Perez again. So it sounds like a When Stars Collide event on multiple fronts.
Yeah, there's a lot of I guess they're obvious to me anyway. There's a lot of similarities between the Johnny Quest concept and the Space Ghost concept in terms of cast. Both concepts have a father figure. In Johnny Quest's case, there's a father figure and an action hero that are kind of split. Space Ghost is they're both in the same character. But then beyond that, there's 2 young people and 1 weird pet. And so once I saw those obvious similarities, I thought, well, there's only one. We have to do this story to play out some of these ideas that I have for something that, again, is so obvious, but that's never been done before. So there's a merging and swapping of casts in the story that when you see it, you just you go, oh my God, again, how has this never been done before? But it hasn't, and we're the first. And I will say this about Sebastian's art. He killed it on the Johnny Quest story that we did, but his rendition of Space Ghost is so right on. It's up there to me. The triumvirate of best Space Ghost artists in comics: Alex Toth, Steve Rude, and Alex Ross. To me, those are the best. depictions of Space Ghost I've ever seen. And Sebastian's is right up there with those three, which is pretty high praise. But I'm dead serious. When people see his Space Ghost, they're going to freak out because it is fantastic.
I mean, I really love what David is throwing down in the Space Ghost series, so I'm definitely looking forward to this. All these Dynamite relaunches, and maybe, okay, I'll admit my own bias here with the nostalgia, maybe a bit, but and I chatted with Tom recently about Herculoids. I haven't gotten a chance to look at Silverhawks yet. Dynamite sent over, but everything has been honestly more solid than I anticipated. With something like that. Well, I'm serious. You don't have, okay, you're going back to the Hanna-Barbera stuff in, the 60s era. And it is in a lot of ways a blank slate, but we've seen these launches stall and fail, very quickly over the years. So when I saw it, I'm like, okay. And then I see who they're bringing in and to helm these different projects. And they're really good, in my opinion. So.
No, it's interesting because I've seen the IP that they gathered and licensed, and it's, on the one hand, it's easy to kind of put them under the same umbrella. They're cartoon properties, animated properties. But to me, there's a big difference generationally between something like Johnny Quest and, say, Thundercats and Silverhawks. I mean, those are 80s properties. Johnny Quest and Space Ghost are 60s properties. But it's funny, they all seem to fit together. I mean, they're doing the Herculoids. I think they're doing like a Wacky Races comic, which, good Lord. So it's kind of, the Dynamite evolution as a publisher has been interesting to watch, and I'm sure that, you could have, 10 years ago, if you'd have said to them they'd be this IP regeneration publisher, they would have said, I don't think so. But here they are. It's kind of what they have morphed into at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you have so many people doing it. Skybound doing all the G.I. Joe stuff. And not that G.I. Joe really ever fell off, but it's really fresh what they're doing with the Energon universe now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, just goes to show you.
Well, I'm waiting for
if an IP is strong and you've got a strong creative vision, they tend to work. They tend to always work. It's rare that you have those two elements that you have it's a stiff. It's usually pretty good and usually does pretty well.
I'm personally hoping that they will do a Grape Ape kind of playing off of the kaiju theme.
Sure.
That is, I will go nuts over that book. That would be amazing. Because he's my favorite of all that stuff.
Yeah.
I have no idea why.
I remember Grape Ape. Yeah, but these things, again, goes back to some things. These things are iconography. The iconography sticks for some reason. You don't know why. It's there, and you tap into it, especially when you're a kid. Your fascination with something is very on the surface, but that surface has a depth as well, because it's something in your brain. It's instinctual. It's not very thought out. Because listen, if we dove into Grape Ape's continuity or history, there's probably not a lot there to hang on to. And yet something about the name, something about the iconography, it works. I agree. It does work.
Well, that's the thing about the Herculoids. When Tom and I were talking about it, it is so formulaic. Okay, somebody's invading the planet. Nobody knows why, and nobody really cares at that time. But it's just a revolving door of different invaders, and you have people in loincloths with these weird beasts that are just, staving off the invasion, and that's the blueprint. That's all you got. So, yeah.
But that's a lot.
Well,
I mean, that's good bones, though. You can hang a lot of meat on those bones.
Yeah, yeah. I got a sneak peek of Tom sent me it, and I really like it. It's a great establishing shot for a lot of the things that were missing with just the original concept. And there, as you say, there were a lot of holes there to fill.
Yeah.
So he's doing a good job getting that kicked off. But
Great.
I know you have two big yet to be announced projects, which I'm sure you can't talk about, coming up in 2025, but it feels like a big year for you. I guess welcome back is in order, I suppose.
Well, thanks. I mean, I should forewarn everybody. I don't know if even, I mean, these things are so big, and so there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of, I don't even know if they're going to be out in 2025. We may be able to start talking about them in 2025, but it's looking like it might be even next year before they actually see print, which is fine. I mean, things take how long they take, and in both cases, it will be so worth it that I can't tell you. It's amazing what we got cooking.
Awesome. Well, I'll hit you up whenever that happens.
Sure.
We'll talk again about it.
Definitely.
Joe, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. I love hanging out with you. So appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Byron. Appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Well, Weapon X-Men hits shelves on February 19th, at least as far as we know right now. So you know what to do. Call your shops, let them know that you want it. I loved it. So if my recommendation is worth anything, then there you go. Pick it up. This is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.